Hey Bioites, this is Ms. Klemme and welcome to the screencast on Introduction to Eukaryotes. Today we're actually going to look at the entire eukaryotic domain and all the organisms that are found in that domain. Now remember, to be in the eukaryote domain, we have to have one thing in common, and that is that we have to have our DNA enclosed in the nucleus. And all of these things, starting with the goldenrod all the way up to the red, have that one trait in common. The things over here in purple and blue do not. So let's recap what we've done so far. So we've looked at two groups of organisms that are not eukaryotes. The first are viruses. So they're non-living essentially because they require a host. The second thing we've talked about are the bacteria. And so what makes those really different than the eukaryotes is because they have DNA that's not enclosed in any sort of nucleus. So we classify them as prokaryotic and unicellular. So basically what we're going to do in this video is take a look at everything else that's out there, everything that's in the eukaryotic domain. So what I'd like you to do as you follow along on this podcast, make sure you're filling out question 2. Be sure to pause it at certain points in the video to add color that coordinates with my particular screen as well. And make sure you add some notes as you go along that will fill in. So here we go, the eukaryotic domain. Let's zoom in on this first half, everything to the left. Alright, there are 3 different colors on here that correlate to 3 different groups of organisms. The first, in the goldenrod, are a group called the protists. And the protists can be a lot of different traits, but the 2 that I find continually pop up are obviously that they're eukaryotic, and then they can be uni or multicellular. Like these 2 are both unicellular, for example, like this paramecium here. The second group in green are the plants, and of course they're eukaryotic, but they are multicellular. They can't move, they're non-mobile, and they make their own food. They're autotrophic. And the third group in brown are the fungi. Just like protists, they can be either unicellular like a yeast, or multicellular like the mushrooms that you're used to seeing right here. But like plants, they are non-mobile. However, what makes them a little bit different from plants is that they aren't autotrophic. They actually have to consume food. So although they look maybe very similar to a plant, they actually have to consume and take in just like we do. So let's recap those first 3 groups. The first one we looked at in yellow were the protists. The second group that we looked at were the green plants. And the third group that we looked at were the fungi. So make sure you're filling these in on your accompanying note sheet. So take a moment if you have to and pause the video. But we're going to move ahead. Now what we're going to look at is this half of the tree of life. Everything in red. So let's zoom in on that. Alright, here we are in red, and that major group, as I'm sure you can probably guess, are the animals. What makes them an animal? What makes you an animal are the following traits. Not only are we eukaryotic, just like everyone else on the tree in this domain, but we're many-celled. We're heterotrophic. We eat and consume other things for energy. But we're also pretty mobile, which means we don't have any cell walls, which keep us really, really rigid. We have other ways of supporting our bodies and to keep us upright, so we don't have to rely on cell walls like plants do. Now, within the animal kingdom, there are 2 major divisions. So I'm going to draw a line between those 2 major divisions. And so everything to the left are much simpler organisms, and they're called invertebrates. They're called invertebrates because they don't have a vertebral column. They don't have a backbone to support themselves. And on the other half of this, we have one little lizard representing them. They're the opposite. They're called vertebrates. And so those have a backbone. Sometimes you'll see or hear them referred to as chordates. Okay? It means the same thing, essentially. So make sure when you follow along in this portion of the video that you're filling in question 3. The invertebrates versus the vertebrates. Now, what's really interesting to note is that invertebrates make up almost all of the animal kingdom. In fact, they make up about 95% of all animals, which leaves vertebrates only 5% of the pie. Some examples of our invertebrate relatives include anything as diverse from sponges and jellyfish, lots of different types of worms, and then there are lots of things with an exoskeleton or a tough outer shell like clams and oysters. Octopus and squid fall under this category. Even arthropods like a crab or a lobster or a spider, and then there's also the starfish that have a pretty tough exoskeleton as well. But now let's go on to the next slide here and focus in on our chordate friends. Here's the same picture of our tree of life, and I'll draw in our dividing line again. So our invertebrates are over here, and our vertebrates are the pictures we see here. Now our vertebrates that we have over on this side really make the transition from water onto land. Now our first group of vertebrates are the fish, and there's lots of different types of fish even. There's fish without bones, like sharks or stingrays. And then there are fish with bones, like bluegill or tuna. After that, we have a group of the amphibians, which includes frogs and toads, even salamanders. And then we move to reptiles, which include, as the picture suggests, snakes. But not only snakes, it includes groups such as alligators, crocodiles, lizards, turtles, and tortoises. Now we move into air with the birds, such as robins and sparrows and eagles and ostriches. And finally, the last group to evolve are mammals, which includes us. So that's a look at the animal kingdom, and specifically the phylum Chordata, the vertebrates. Now let's recap every single thing on here. The last piece of the pie here is our animal kingdom. You can see on the bottom we have all the different traits of those living organisms, and if we track them, add them to our tree of life, they're all our invertebrates, which are the most, or make up the majority of the animal kingdom, and then there are vertebrates. And so if we wanted to track time, oops, if that was straight, here are our newest evolved organisms, and these are our most old organisms that have been around. So you can see the general progression over time of living things. And that's the tree of life, specifically the eukaryotic branch. And I hope you found that helpful. At this point now, you can go ahead and use your classification cards to fill in question 4 of your notes. Thanks for listening.